flags in the air. Boogity, boogity, boogity. Let's go racing, boys.
All right, it is the best time of the year over at the Breaking Balls podcast, Ad. It's NASCAR breakdown time, and no more silly season talk, no more rumors. We got cars on track this week, Ad, at Phoenix, and damn it, it was nice to see. It was a good feeling, and I'm ready to talk about it, but it feels nice to be just talking about NASCAR again, doesn't it?
You know, it feels good to get back in the swing of things, Bob. You know, like Jimmy Johnson getting in the next-gen car, just to get your feet wet a little bit, kind of get you back used to the idea of NASCAR. Obviously, they did the tests over there at Phoenix. NASCAR Twitter reacted accordingly. We had things to say about the muffler. We had things to say about the spoiler. We had all sorts of opinions there, Bob, but just good to see cars on track, like you said. I think the biggest thing for me was some of the pictures that came out of it were very cool. Obviously, social media teams, I think RFK's always done a really good job on social media. They seem to do a good job with Brad Keselowski's presence. I think Jimmy Johnson obviously being there is cool, just to see him kind of get behind the wheel of one of these cars for the first time, get his thoughts on it. So good to see cars back on the track, Bob.
Like you said, RFK, they do it so well. I love that Ken Block tribute. Not sure if you saw it there. It was just really well done with the numbers, the color scheme, and then they had the little rally block on the C post window. It was just really, really cool to see there, because small things like that, that I think are going to take that team maybe a little bit further in the future, kind of from that outdated feel. But you mentioned the muffler and the spoilers. It feels like that was kind of the talk from the week there, and we're childish over here at Breaking Balls, but we're not that childish. That was actually the talk, was mufflers and spoilers. So, and without further ado, I'm pissed off NASCAR has made the cars quieter, and I'm not going to watch the rest of the season, is what some man on Facebook is probably saying. But not me, just for the record.
Yeah, there's probably some gentleman who is a little bit angry, a keyboard warrior in a Facebook group somewhere, that does not like that these cars are getting quieter. We were talking a lot about mufflers and the volume and all sorts of weird things. But, I mean, as somebody who sat in a race where a lot of these people are making the point of, if you want to race NASCAR in stadiums, how are you going to do it with cars that loud? I mean, let me say this. I went to the Clash at the Coliseum and did not wear earplugs. No ear protection at all. Nothing. Were my ears ringing for the next 2 days? Yes, absolutely. But were they terrible to where I couldn't have enjoyed myself during the event? Absolutely not. So no, I don't think the cars are too loud. Making them quieter, I mean, obviously, anytime you do anything like that, it's going to help out with the fan type of experience. But at this point, I think NASCAR fans who go to the racetrack are kind of used to having to wear some sort of ear protection while they're there. So realistically, what are we talking about here? I mean, it just seems like a weird thing for fans to get hung up on. I thought, honestly, if you want my thought on it, they changed up the front end of this car in a really major way. I saw some pictures that it looks like it's a little bit more, not so many concaves on the hood. It looks like it's a little bit more boxy, which I think will make a big difference. But, I mean, Bob, and then we go to the spoilers. As somebody who's been riding around with a 2-inch spoiler my entire life, it's not that big of a deal. It's certainly nothing to talk about on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever the heck. I mean, it's really nothing that you want to make too public. But, I mean, from us short spoiler guys, I guess it's good for NASCAR to be giving us some publicity, Bob.
Hey, listen, this is the day and age of the short spoiler, folks. This is our time. So, to be quite honest, it looked a little funky, obviously, that little spoiler on the back. But other than that, I'm not smart enough to understand the changes, and I didn't, like you said. I mean, we were at the Clash. Yeah, they're going up to second gear, so to be fair, we're not hearing them at full volume. But if you're going to a track, you probably are wearing some sort of ear protection. If not, you kind of get what you get there. And most of those people wouldn't have known the difference if they hadn't mentioned it, to be honest. So I think it's just one of those things that people like to complain about. But great to see cars on the track. Curious to see what they got from this testing. Most of us, normal fans won't know. It's the smarter people that are in the R&D shops that are really getting the most out of it. But Ad, some more news that happened today that we can actually discuss, that we will actually understand a little bit further. A little bit of news for the driver's seat. The 14 out in Stewart-Haas not going anywhere anytime soon for Mr. Chase Briscoe. His third year in the Cup Series, I believe, is going to be this year, and they've locked him up for, quote, many, many years, according to Uncle Tony. So very exciting for the Indiana native getting to drive, Tony Stewart's number. I mean, his car that he basically inherited. I mean, it's got to be a very cool thing for him, and it really kind of shows that SHR is probably putting their faith in Chase moving forward, right?
Yeah, I mean, it just the first domino of the SHR, I guess if you want to call it a puzzle, whatever you want to call it over there. Obviously, with Harvick leaving, that was kind of the first kind of initial shock, and then this seems to be the first domino effect falling from it, with them deciding to commit to Chase Briscoe long term, kind of make them the anchor. Feels like a pretty safe play. Somebody who's been in your program long enough, who's raced with a lot of the guys who will eventually be moving on or leaving. So a good candidate to kind of keep the culture of your race shop up. It just seems to make sense to me, Bob. Not necessarily anything that I think is going to, like, oh my gosh, it guarantees them to be a championship contender, because honestly, I don't think Chase Briscoe's necessarily shown us that yet. I mean, obviously winning a race last year and the deep playoff run that they made, I think it just goes to show you that when he's given the right resources and when he's given money and the equipment to do well, he will perform. Just be interesting to see moving forward the pieces that they put around him, I guess, is what I'm curious to see.
Yeah, like you mentioned, not necessarily a championship contender right away moving forward, but it does show that, in that post-Kevin Harvick era, Chase Briscoe is going to be the anchor of SHR. He's going to be the flagship guy. And, from a guy that 5-6 years ago was, on the edge of losing his Xfinity ride and, having a big win, I believe it was Talladega. I know it was in the 98 car, though, and really becoming kind of an Xfinity hold the last few years. Taking that step to Cup 2 years ago. This was his second year. And showed speed. I mean, obviously winning the Phoenix race earlier in the season. And then, not just being one of the first 4 out in the playoffs, which both of us at this podcast sure did, along with pretty much everyone else in the NASCAR fandom. They had, Briscoe, Cindric, those guys quick out. Suarez, quick out. I mean, Briscoe held his own in the playoffs there. And, when you look at it, I mean, do you remember the moment when Cole Custer laid a block for him to get in at the Roval? I do. I sure fucking do, people. I remember that. So look, Cole Custer's a team guy. Stewart-Haas can build around that, and the guy's a young driver that's going to have speed moving forward. We'll see what happens, but it's definitely an interesting play post Kevin Harvick's retirement.
Yeah,
or retirement announcement.
Retirement announcement, exactly. Bob, it'll be very interesting. I think you touched on it a little bit by mentioning our sweet Princess block at the Roval, but another transition that SHR is making this year. I mean, let's just state the obvious really quickly. Kevin Harvick still drives for SHR, obviously retirement year. We talked about that in the first episode. If you want to go listen to that. Eric Almirola and his Smitty Field money are going to be firmly in the number 10 car. Until further notice, it's too much money for them to give up in sponsorship. It helps their operation run. Eric Almirola is not going anywhere. Bob, do we agree there?
Until that check keeps coming, or until Eric keeps coming to the track, I mean, yeah, I think that's fair to say that 10 cars wrapped up for the next year again.
Yep. So I guess the only seat really of consequence left to talk about at SHR is the one that Ryan Preece gets into, the one that was previously Cole Custer's, our sweet prince. Bob, I think there's a lot of pressure on Ryan Preece in this seat. Kind of feels like his last chance. Certainly a guy who's had a Cup ride before. Rather underwhelming in that first stint, which kind of got him sent back down into trucks and that type of thing. So I'm interested to see how this goes, if he's learned from his previous experiences enough to kind of make this one the one that sticks. I know that I believe he had Tony Stewart's support in the argument. So be very interesting to see. Could this be the beginning of a fracture of a relationship of Stewart and Haas? I'm just going to say it. You may want to look, because if this doesn't go well, I certainly could see it being a crack in that relationship. So, Bob, I've given you a little bit to go on. Tell me, please, your thoughts on Ryan Preece getting the seat this year?
Well, we're going over 4 teams tonight, and this is the team I'm concerned about the most going on a tangent on. So if I get at any point like that, please feel free to cut in here. But yeah, I do agree with you on the pressure for Ryan Preece. I believe 31 years old. I believe Ryan Preece and Joey Logano are the same age. Now that is something wild to ponder. That being said, Ryan Preece has really banked on himself the last 2 years. He had that JTG Doherty car when they, downgraded to one car, kept Stenhouse last year. He said, okay, I'm not going to take a cheap Xfinity ride. I'm not going to get in a Rick Ware car or anything in the back charter. I'm going to go and, take a select few amount of truck races for a very competitive truck. I'm going to bet on myself to win, or if not win, be very, very competitive to the point of almost winning. And I'm going to show my worth. And, he's obviously Kevin Harvick backed. That's his agent, Kevin Harvick Incorporated. So, there's obviously the ties there with SHR and Ford. But credit to the guy. I mean, like you said, multiple truck wins last year. I know the Nashville one, he's won back-to-back now. I mean, the guy was competitive in all of his cars, and it's kind of unfair to judge him in the JTD car because just kind of riding around keeping the car clean more than anything with Stenhouse there. And it's a shop that can't afford many more wrecks. So did what he did there. But, yeah, a lot of pressure on Ryan Preece this year to perform. And, you take a guy like Cole Custer who's a young guy, still developing, and you throw him back in Xfinity, he's going to be winning races. He's going to be waiting in the wings still at SHR. A lot of pressure on Ryan. But, there was a guy I talked to at the NASCAR Awards down in Nashville. He works for SHR. He told me, point blank on record, he said, Cole didn't have the, quote, nuts, and I'm quoting this guy, the nuts to drive Cup. Ryan Preece is a talented wheelman. I've seen him drive my whole life. This guy is going to be able to drive Cup Series at SHR. So I'm very curious to see that. And, Kevin Harvick is what he is. Briscoe is who he is. Those guys are going to be competing for playoff spots. It's going to be up to guys like, Almirola to pick up the slack, or Ryan Preece. Can Ryan Preece sneak into the playoffs? I don't know, but if Ryan Preece does, that means SHR is probably having a good year too, Ad.
Yeah, 100%. It'll be really interesting to kind of check how that team progresses throughout the year, especially with Ryan Preece kind of being back in the seat. Just very interested. Bob, I think the one thing that kind of struck me while you were talking there was, obviously Harvick's leaving. Almirola's kind of getting up there in age, but as long as that check still cashes, he will be in that seat. But they committed to Chase Briscoe. To look forward into silly season next year, we've got some decent-sized names headed towards free agency. One of them, I'll go ahead and start the conversation, because I think next year may be a year that SHR makes a little bit of a splash in driver free agency, maybe signs somebody, goes cross-manufacturer, and gets somebody of interest in their garage to kind of round out the team now that they've got Chase Briscoe. I mean, a few names come to mind. The first one for me is Alex Bowman. I think, obviously, with him going into the contract year, things have been kind of, I don't know. It just feels like he's been disappointing in that job in the 48 at Hendrick. Obviously, kind of hard to say that when he won a race last year, but I mean, wait, did he win a race last year? He won Vegas, didn't he?
He won Vegas.
Yeah. I was going to say, I was like, why did I feel like he didn't win Vegas? But no, he actually backed into a win at Vegas. That's why it felt like it. But be interesting to see headed into silly season where he ends up. I think SHR may be a place that we want to kind of look into that as far as a landing spot for him. But Bob, going into silly season, anybody else you think they could take a look at? I mean, interesting free agents coming up for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty just with driver spots too. Retirements, obviously the Harvick and Truex stuff. You're not sure with Truex there too, but it's interesting that you mentioned Bowman. I think 7-8 wins in his last 3 seasons. A guy that definitely could fill that spot at SHR and probably get you in the playoffs every year. I would think. I mean, he's a very good driver, but is he a championship caliber driver? Is he somebody that can take you to that next step like Kevin Harvick could? I'm not so sure. That being said, there's a guy that I think you probably could make the argument for at Trackhouse with Ross Chastain. He's 30 years old. He's about to go into the prime of his career, and I'm very curious to see the loyalty there because Trackhouse obviously has given him that shot, keeping him with Chip Ganassi's former team. And I'm curious to see. We'll talk about Trackhouse here in a minute, but Ross Chastain's another free agent that I wouldn't be shocked if teams threw some money at in the offseason just to see if that extension doesn't get done quickly at Trackhouse, it leaves the door open for other teams like SHR who have a big gap to fill in that 4-car. Maybe Busch Light can stay on with Ross Chastain. Maybe they don't lose people like Busch Light and sponsorship deals like Hunt Brothers that are going to be probably leaving with Kevin Harvick because they're Kevin Harvick backed. If they at least lose or have a chance with those sponsors with Ross Chastain or can at least easily replace them, why not take a guy like Ross Chastain or Alex Bowman who, let's face it, is stuck with Ally because Ally was with the 48. Other than that, Bowman doesn't really bring a ton of sponsorship. And I'm not sure, maybe Chastain doesn't either, but he's a lot more marketable, especially after this last season. So that's a name to watch, but I'm curious if that's even on the table even.
Yeah, I mean, it just is really interesting because both Trackhouse guys, and we may as well just transition to talking about them now, Bob, because that's the next team on our preview list. Trackhouse, I mean, obviously, you don't get much better of a start as far as a picking a charter up and kind of turning things around, getting a guy in the playoff. I mean, multiple guys in the playoffs, both drivers in the playoffs, forgot. And, almost having both guys advance. I mean, it's Trackhouse, duh. It's Ross Chastain. It's Daniel Suarez. I mean, I don't know, Bob.
It's not a Trackhouse. It's not a Trackhouse. It's a track home.
It's a track home, Bob. But I'm just so curious because it feels like they had lightning in a bottle last year. Will they be able to keep it? I don't know. But both of the drivers are going to be free agents at the end of this year. Who stays? Who goes? What does this all mean? I mean, there's so many questions for this team that was so successful last year, Bob. It's just, will they be able to recreate it? I guess is the biggest one. So I ask you, Bob, will Trackhouse be able to recreate some of that success that they saw last year?
It's hard to say, just because I think that their consistency will probably still be there as far as Ross Chastain's speed was there all year. He was in the top 10 a lot of the races, if not top 5, especially that first half of the season. I mean, I think he only had 2 wins there, Ad. We were kind of discussing this pre-race or pre-taping, but it felt like he had a lot more than 2 wins. He was in a very competitive car. But on the other hand, Daniel Suarez, he got the win at Sonoma, had a couple good races, and, competitive in the playoffs there. It took a Roval, I believe, power steering issue where he couldn't even shift at some point, and it was a mechanical issue that knocked him out of the playoffs. It wasn't because of his speed. That's the real question for me, is can they have that second car do the same thing this year? Can they get that second car in one way or the other? Playoffs, points, wins, I'm not sure. It's going to be very interesting to see, though, because if so, that shows that Trackhouse is here for the long run, and it wasn't just a fluke. It wasn't a one-year magic run because, hey, they had a lot of creative minds in that shop that, on a level playing field with a new car 1 year, they got it right when some people didn't. Now that you have a off season, you have some more time to develop and test. The teams that have that big budget, like Hendrick, like Gibbs, like Penske, Trackhouse is still a small operation in terms of funding compared to those two. They're getting to that point. Their competitiveness showed this year, but they're still getting there. And so I'm very curious in this offseason if anyone took a big leap or Trackhouse said, you know what, we're here to stay. We're going to get both cars in the playoffs again because, hey, we mentioned Ross Chastain's a free agent. Teams will be calling. Daniel Suarez is a free agent too. And if he doesn't perform, that's a hot seat, Ad. People are going to be wanting that second seat at Trackhouse because of the future there. So big pressure on Suarez to have another year like this.
Well, it's one of those teams, and I think there's a few of them that really feel like it's not 1 and 2, it's 1A and 1B. And Trackhouse really is one of those situations where it feels like both cars consistently can win and were competitive last year. So it was very interesting to see, especially as they're kind of growing as a business, kind of one of the newer business models in NASCAR. Just very interested to see how competitive they will be this year. As far as kind of keeping the momentum going, you would think that, I mean, they were 2 of the more consistent cars on the track all year last year. The only reason that Ross Chastain was inconsistent to finish wasn't necessarily mechanical. It was just he would either, I mean, it was Ross Chastain. He would either, Yeah, it was either wreck or be wrecked out there. So, I mean, I'm just so curious to see where this team ends up. There's a lot going on. I mean, I don't know. I think so highly of the operation. I don't know. There's just so many different thoughts I have when you think about Trackhouse in the future, and I don't know. Pitbull.
But you mentioned their operation and how you like how I mean, the way that their future is looking. I mean, they're the perfect example. We said this when we really started this podcast. It felt like we repeated ourselves for the first 4 or 5 episodes, but for these teams that are prospective buyers to buy charters or want to break into NASCAR, Trackhouse is the perfect example of how to hit the ground running. And yeah, they timed it great. They bought Chip Ganassi out. A lot of that was already set up too, but still have to put together this new car. You have to put together all these new minds, and at the end of the day, all these chiefs can come together and it doesn't work, but they put together an operation that worked last year. This is a big step for their future, but they've got so many different options moving forward. Outside of Chastain and Suarez, they've got that third car, that Project 91 car that we'll see multiple times this year. I'm sure we'll see a couple of different cool drivers in there, just like Kimi Räikkönen last year. But it shows that they're wanting to be competitive, that they're not just throwing that car out there for the 500 either ad. They're just saying, hey, we've got 2 great cars. We're not going to risk a third just because.
Okay, you know what, Bob? You kind of took the thought right out of my mind. As they have the Project 91 car as an option, who is a driver that you think that we will see drive the Trackhouse 91 car this year? Who's your bold prediction?
Bold prediction. Ooh. Mick Schumacher.
Ooh.
Mick Schumacher is just a reserve driver for Mercedes right now. Knows the folks at Haas very well, so knows the NASCAR world just a little bit. I wouldn't be shocked if a young guy like that wanted to take a drive and do a road course. He saw Kimi do it, an older vet. It would be great to see someone like Mick Schumacher do it.
See, I see your Mick Schumacher, and I actually like that pick, but I will raise you a little bit and say maybe it's Daniel Ricciardo. Maybe it's somebody who's looking for a little bit more permanent of a place. Maybe he come races stock cars across the pond. Who knows? I mean, just a thought. That rumor's been out there forever. Would be really interesting to see him in that car this year, though, Bob. He was rumored last year, so be interested to see.
And another reserve F1 driver. The man loves stock car racing, and personality would be great in America. Said he would never do Indy cars because of the ovals, but you know what, Daniel? NASCAR does road courses. Lucky for you. So would be so open to that. Also would love to see some of the IndyCar guys like Newgarden come over, Palou. But at this point, I think Trackhouse has so many guys calling ad that they're going to have to be denying people too.
Yeah, I mean they're definitely going to get to be a little bit selective. Bob, we may as well. We've talked about Trackhouse for a long time here. Young team was able to get a win last year, kind of solidified that they're here to stay as far as success goes. And another team that kind of fits that bill, 2311. We've got the hotshot celebrity owners. We've got Michael Jordan. We've got Denny Hamlin. New face is driving the cars this year, kind of, obviously. The old face, Bubba Wallace, but trading spaces a little bit with another team that we'll talk about later. Tyler Reddick driving the 45 car. Bob? I mean, I didn't think we would see it this soon. I think, obviously, when the announcement came and it was 2024, we kind of were all scratching our head like, well, if it's going to be 2024, why are you announcing the acquisition this early? So writing was on the wall a little bit. Good to see Tyler Reddick behind the wheel there at Toyota for 2311. Bob, what is your expectation for this team this year?
It's a very interesting dynamic. You looked at Kurt Busch, and he really, I think, took that team far last year with his experience and his, just veteran leadership. I think that really took that team from being that one-car operation in Bubba Wallace. And you saw Bubba, flashes with just that one-car team. The 2311 last year showed speed at multiple different tracks, and I think a lot of that was having Kurt Busch's expertise and leadership around. And he's staying around. He'll be part of the team as an advisor. Still not cleared medically to drive, so he can't even do that third car, unfortunately, anytime soon, which hate to see that. But you look at the future of this team, Tyler Reddick, won, I believe, 3 races last year, if I'm not mistaken, was just as competitive to win 10, to be honest. I mean, the man was either winning races or having some kind of issue that took him out of the race. It was kind of impressive. So to take that speed from the 8-car RCR, I want to see what he can do at that 45, which did show signs of being a very, very good car last year. So you pair him with Bubba Wallace. I think the expectation is to get both cars in the playoffs this year at 2311. I think the expectation is if either car misses the playoffs, it was a failure. I'll be honest, because Bubba Wallace, I talked about Tyler Reddick having a great year, Ad. You can attest to this, so you can talk about it, but Bubba had a great second half to the season.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. Really, it was one of the drivers who came on strong in the second half. I mean, ended up getting his win during the second half of the year to get him into the dance. I mean, it just one of those things, Bob, that you look at this team and the future is massively bright. I mean, you've got 2 young drivers who are often, the talk of the media. A lot of media attention for this team. I think there's a lot of good things lining up for 2311. A lot of big name sponsors. The drivers, I think they're both really recognizable names in the sport. One of these new teams that have kind of come on, and I think is definitely going to kind of break up the establishment because they're doing things a little bit differently. The same way we talked about with Trackhouse, I think this is a team that has looked at funding differently. They've looked at how to build, this is their first year with their own pit crews and stuff like that. So it'll be very interesting to see if the culture that they are building is sustainable for success long term. I'm just, very, very excited to see how this whole thing goes. I think you've got 2 strong drivers it's kind of a playoff or bust mentality there. I feel like if both of these cars aren't in the playoffs, I definitely think heads may roll, as the kids will say. Not that anybody would go anywhere after 1 year, but I mean, it would certainly be disappointing if these 2 cars didn't make the playoffs this year.
Agreed 100%. You look at especially Bubba Wallace. This is going to be his 3rd year in that car. Took a huge stride, like we said, last year, especially winning at Kansas. No excuses for him to not make his first playoff berth this year. There's absolutely none. It's set up now. He's got Kurt Busch's expertise still over there. He's had all these different runs in that 23 car now, the 45, whatever number he was in last year. They switched it out so much at the end there. It got weird. But no, you mentioned it. There's no excuses, playoff or bust for both cars. And you also did mention, though, they're expanding. They're going to be having that 3rd car in the Daytona 500. They're taking their own pit crews. They're not using satellite teams from Joe Gibbs anymore. They're going to be doing their own facilities. They're breaking ground on a Charlotte shop that's going to be huge, state-of-the-art. It's fair to say that 2311 has plans to being the top Toyota team moving forward. With the uncertainty of Joe Gibbs, we've mentioned it before here, there's no reason to think that this is not another year where that step gets taken where 2311 challenges more for that top seat at Toyota.
I mean, especially with, we'll talk about it in a little bit here, but with Kyle Busch being gone, I mean, Toyota really has lost its flagship driver. I mean, you and I were talking.
The face of Toyota.
Exactly. It's one of those things, probably, like we were talking about, the best driver that Toyota's had. And the fact that he isn't driving for them right now, it opens up an opportunity for 2311, a guy like Tyler Reddick. I mean, or Bubba Wallace at this point even. I mean, he's got enough sponsorship behind him. It'll be interesting to see because it feels like that top dog position for Toyota as a manufacturer is very much open. And it'll be really interesting because I think these 2311 drivers are a lot better poised to kind of grab that position than we may have thought they would be if we look back a few years when this was just an idea, Denny Hamlin and Michael Jordan getting into racing, because in a short period of time, they've become massively competitive. So things are changing around here, Bob. It's crazy.
It's just such a marketable team for every single reason. The drivers are marketable. The sponsorships are ones that we actually know who they are. These are Fortune 500 major companies, DoorDash, McDonald's, Columbia, all these different places, DraftKings. It just feels like a new wave coming in and just kind of feels like the changing of the guard, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, Bob, you mentioned it, and it's the perfect transition. It's a changing of the guard, and we'll call it a changing of the guard, a switch of the drivers, a prisoner swap that we haven't seen of the like since Brittany Griner on the tarmac. It was Tyler Reddick and Kyle Busch passing each other like ships in the night. Thoughts,
Yeah.
questions,
Yeah.
comments, concerns?
If you would have said
RCR,
if you would have said if you would have said this time last year again that Kyle Busch was going to be driving the 8 car at RCR, there's just so much to like break down with that we could have our own podcast dedicated to it. A lot of times we've had it in this show, but at the end of the day, I think that this 8 car is going to be competitive again. You've got Randall Burnett again at the crew chief spot, the exact same speed that last year Tyler Reddick had. We mentioned 3 wins, and outside of issues mechanically, tires, wrecks, engines, you name it, 6-7 wins was on the table probably for that team. They were one of the fastest teams in the garage, just wasn't consistent. You get somebody like Kyle Busch who's pissed off, wants to prove himself. The last time he did this, he won 8 races in a Joe Gibbs Toyota outside of his, Hendrick demotion. Why is this not going to be the same thing? I see Tyler Reddick having a good year. I see Kyle Busch having a better year. I see him winning 3-4 races and getting into the playoffs, maybe making a round of 8 push, maybe even a final 4 push. But you could Austin Dillon. He's just kind of going to be the guy that is the wingman there. We'll talk about him in a second. But this is Kyle Busch's team ad, and all the funding, all the resources. It's going to be the 8 team.
Yep. No, the 8 team's going to get all the time, all the attention. Probably something new, Kyle Busch. I think I saw an interview with Richard Childress yesterday on Twitter that he's just ecstatic, loves the competitor that Kyle Busch has been, was talking about how he had brought all the guys to COTA to race and do all sorts of different things. I mean, just really trying to build the culture there. And ultimately, Bob, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, Tyler Reddick is going to have a ton of success this year, but I think Kyle Busch, with this RCR engine that they've built, it seems to be the first kind of piece of equipment that has really differentiated itself in this next gen car is that RCR engine. So if they could get it tuned to where, to Kyle Busch's liking, which is a big if, because we've heard it on all the radioactives that get released, everything, Kyle Busch will be hard on the guys setting up this car. And how does that go in a new garage? I think obviously when he's had the time to kind of build up those relationships and yell and scream at guys at Joe Gibbs, I mean, he's been there for years and he knows that it's kind of like that family relationship. How do newer crew members take being yelled at and things and chastised when things don't go wrong in the same way? Or does Kyle Busch do a 180 and is he more of an elder statesman of the sport? I just think there's so many questions around this team. But I think the one thing that you can't deny is that this 8 team is going to be fast this year. And I think it's a shoe-in playoff team for me.
No, agreed, no doubt. They're going to be fast. And like you mentioned, the family dynamic at Joe Gibbs that Kyle Busch has kind of been surrounded with. He's going to that same kind of familiar family thing at RCR, if not even more entrenched in the culture because, obviously we've got Childress there. It's a family-run thing with Mike Dillon and Austin Dillon. Then right there, the grandson of Richard Childress, Austin Dillon, running the 3 car. I mean, you look at that car. He was quietly consistent last year. Top probably 18, 19 driver. He gets in at the very end with that weird, Daytona race. But credit to the 3 team. They've gotten into the playoffs multiple times the last few years. I think that's the goal again this year is can we get both cars in the playoffs for RCR? That's the goal.
Yeah.
And if the 3 team doesn't, that's a failure.
Yeah, I think the 3 team going forward, I think it's got to be playoffs or bust. I think at this point they've shown that is that is their floor at this point. So what is the ceiling on that 3 car? I'm not necessarily sure. I think that's a team that will oftentimes get a lot of criticism just because of the number and using the 3 period. And the fact that, honestly, it's one of those cars that, as fans see it, kind of puts a bad taste in your mouth, no matter whose grandson's driving it. So just be anxious to see if they can take another step. I think Austin Dillon, they haven't done him a ton of favors as far as how they're marketing him throughout the sport because he seems to be a pretty likable guy, but the life in the fast lane stuff doesn't necessarily seem to suit his personality in that way. So, be very interesting to see how this all goes moving forward. But kind of nice to have Kyle Busch there to kind of take some of that media attention away that he would have otherwise gotten, in my opinion.
Yeah, the life in the fast lane doesn't paint him in the best picture just from the casual fan. It's not what NASCAR needs for, the primetime TV. But I think it's probably an unfair portrayal of Austin. He seems like a genuine guy. Credit to him. You can say the last name all you want, but he has earned his spot there.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, but I was going to say, Bob, speaking of NASCAR and the media, I've got good news and bad news for you, Bob. The good news is that Jeff Gordon went on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. Great, awesome, lovely. Talk a little bit of NASCAR, talk about the Clash, get people excited. The bad news is that Jeff Gordon has. Why do I keep calling him Jeff Gordon? Can I ask that? All right, whatever. We're gonna keep moving.
I don't know.
Jeff Gordon. Why is Jeff Gordon, who hasn't driven in a NASCAR since 2015, going on the Tonight Show? Why don't we have? Is there not an active driver that we could have maybe put in that spot? I mean, don't get me wrong. Even Jimmy Johnson would have been better, but Jeff Gordon is involved in the sport, obviously, as an executive at Hendrick. But at this point, I get it from a television perspective because you need a notable name to fill that seat. But is it problematic for NASCAR that we don't necessarily have a guy that we can put in that seat, so we keep having to go back to Old Faithful? And we keep having to go back and put Jeff Gordon in the seat because that's what NASCAR's been doing for the better part of 2 decades. I mean, when is NASCAR going to kind of let that next star be the star? Because I guess you thought it would be Harvick naturally, but Harvick's going to retire before he even got the chance to do it. So who's it going to be, do you think, Bob? It just seems interesting.
Yeah, it's a question that I think NASCAR wishes they could answer themselves. But yeah, I mean, you look at NASCAR's stars the last few years. It's Dale Jr., it's Jeff Gordon, it's the 3 cars still. I mean, those are the iconic cars in NASCAR, the Petty 43. It's they need somebody to kind of break in and take over again. You need a face like Denny Hamlin to speak up, a Kyle Busch, guys like that to keep their mark, and you need young guys to show up like Chastain, like Chris Bell, and Noah Gragson, I think, is going to be another name we'll see in the future that's kind of, polarizing as far as, blending the media markets. But, yeah, it's a question that NASCAR needs to answer, and it's something that's not going to change anytime soon.
Yeah, it kind of struck me because I thought to myself, oh, cool, it's awesome. Jeff Gordon's back on late night TV. It's always good to see him, that type of thing. But then, obviously, your mind starts to wonder and kind of wander a little bit and be like, hey, like, why is it that Jeff Gordon is still doing these interviews? I mean, the guy hasn't driven in who knows how long. But obviously an iconic name. You can never take that away. And, like, obviously big Jeff Gordon fan personally, but just one of those things that you couldn't help but think about, Bob.
Nope, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right now, Bob, we're doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time in Breaking Ball's history, we have a game show segment. And the premise of this was very simple. It comes from a conversation Bob and I were having last night over text message about a certain reality show on VH1. Bob, you watched it. Why don't you give the people a little bit of a taste of what we're talking about here?
Well, I mean, how can you not know about Flavor of Love? It's just a truly reality's best moment in TV history. The former Public Enemy rapper Flava Flav courting women, the original Bachelorette, pretty much, the original Bachelor, courting women, giving them clocks, choosing which one he wanted to be with. 4 seasons, I believe, on VH1, and it really created a star in Tiffany New York Pollard. It created multiple spin-offs. I love New York. I love money. I love reality. It just... And this show was a spin-off of Surreal Life, too. So this was a spin-off of a spin-off of a... Flavor of Love was truly a moment in time.
Well, Bob, one of the key parts of Flavor of Love was that each contestant got a nickname. And one of the things that happens in NASCAR is every so often a guy gets a nickname. So, Bob, the game that I've decided to play with you tonight is I will be reading a nickname that will be either from a NASCAR driver or a Flava Flav love reality show contestant, as we will call it. What's the show called, Bob? One more
All
time.
right. Flavor of love.
Oh, Flavor of Love. Okay, so
Yes.
Bob, we've got a few coming here, so we're gonna come down the pike. We're gonna start early and often. We're gonna hit you with an easy one, kind of softball to get you going. The Intimidator, Bob. Is that from NASCAR or is that Flava Flav?
I'm hoping it's NASCAR Intimidator. I hardly know her.
All right, Bob. Ding. That's 1 point. Bob Perry. Okay. The next one that we have coming up here. This is a nickname. The nickname is Buck Wild. Buck Wild is the nickname, Bob.
I'm going to go Flavor of Love Season 1.
That would be correct. Flavor of Love Season 1. Becky Johnston, Buck Wild, was a top 8 contestant on season, I believe, season 2, Bob. Sorry. That's yeah, that's tough. It's going to be a tough one for you, but
Hate that.
Yep. Anyway. Okay, Bob. The next one that we are going to have for you, the nickname is Smokey.
Ooh. Because it could be old school NASCAR, but it could just be a chick with a deep voice. That Flav was like, I'm going to call you Smokey. I'm going to go with Flavor of Love.
Oh my goodness, ladies and gentlemen, he's on fire.
Is
That's
it
3 in a row. Flavor of Love.
Think
Smokey.
like Flavor.
Yep, that is a top 20 contestant, ladies and gentlemen, from A Flavor of Love. All right, Bob, here's the next nickname. Fireball.
Was Fireball around when Flavor of Love was filmed, which would have been mid to late 2000s? I'm going to say Fireball was Flavor of Love.
No, Fireball is Glenn Fireball Roberts. That's a NASCAR nickname, Bob. So believe it or
I
not,
honestly would have
Roberts earned
believed
the nickname Fireball
both.
as the result of his oh no. Oh no, Bob. Let me read this. Let me read this little gem from the NASCAR website. Glenn Fireball Roberts. Believe it or not, Roberts earned the nickname Fireball as a result of his blazing fastball on the baseball diamond. Sadly, Roberts died as a result of a fiery wreck in the World 600 in Charlotte in 1964.
Well, that's just... I hate how ironic that is.
Well, speaking of dying on the racetrack, and this nickname is Smoke.
Well, I feel like I got a hint there, so I'm going to go with NASCAR.
Yeah, that's good. SRX if you want to be really, really kind of specific there, Bob. But
Not on the dirt
right.
anymore.
No, not on the dirt. Anyway, the next name we've got coming down the pike here for you, Bob, is Silver Fox.
I hate that I can justify this as both again. As a lot of these could be both. Silver Fox. It's got to be Flavor of Love, right?
No, sir. That would be NASCAR. David
Really?
Pearson, who was originally called the Fox, but the Silver was then added a little bit later in his career once he got a little bit grayer. All right, Bob.
Well,
here comes one down the pike for you. Red Oyster.
Red Oyster.
Yeah.
I don't even want to know the context in either way, but Red Oyster seems like Flavor of Love just because of sheer ridiculousness.
Yes, sir.
Pure ridiculousness.
That would be Flavor.
What was her real name?
Her real name. Hold on 1 second. I gotta.
Red Oyster deserves her real name.
Abigail Quintanar, a top 7 contestant on the Flavor of Love. All right, Bob. This is the last one, and it's going to be kind of difficult. So the nickname is Patience, spelled Payshinz. Patience.
I mean, just from the spelling alone, That is absolutely Richard Childress, but since I can't be that specific, I guess I'll pick Flavor of Love.
Yes, sir. Flavor of Love would be the name that you're going with, Bob. At that
I
point,
hate how close that some of these were.
some of these got really close, which is kind of half the
And
fun
then
here.
we learned how Fireball Roberts died tonight, so there you go.
Yes, we did. We accidentally.
There's your Silver Fox lining playbook.
All right, Jennifer Lawrence, calm down. Bob, before we get off the podcast here, before we get ourselves canceled any further, anything you'd like to say?
No, it was fun breaking down a couple more teams tonight. I think we've got the big guns on Sunday night as we break down the football too. But we'll be here. We'll be here on YouTube, on Spotify, on everything for the breakdown. We've got Penske, we've got Joe Gibbs Racing, and Hendrick Motorsports. The big three. The big three. Can't wait to break it down. And I'm sure there'll be some news breaking until then, Ab, because motorsports season never sleeps, does it?
Nope, never does. So keep that Twitter open, keep refreshing, and just wait for the news just like we do. Until then, like, comment, subscribe, share this with a friend. We are hoping to grow here at the Breaking Balls podcast. So bring your 2-inch spoilers and come hang out with us. So bye.